This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Okay, welcome to the Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Catherine, Robert, and I are talking about getting humor on the page. So not necessarily humor writing as a genre, but for all the rest of us, how can we infuse our stories with humor or attempt to? I know Catherine's going to sneak away soon, so I'm just going to toss this ball to you, Catherine. Do you read a lot of funny stories? Is it something you encounter much?
I don't think I read a lot of stories that are funny for the sake of being funny, you know what I mean? But definitely that have humor infused throughout, or that use humor in very deliberate ways to try and bring levity to the situations or with specific characters, or that just literally make me laugh out loud. I think my favorite are the one-liners. Characters that drop one-liners that just make you laugh no matter where you are because you're just so not expecting it. But yeah, definitely I think making your reader laugh is one of the more exciting things that you can do as an author, getting that reaction, because it's so people just don't necessarily always react to your stories, and when they can burst out laughing without even realizing that that's what they're going to do, I think that's a really cool thing that you can do as an author. And definitely something I would strive for. How
about you, Robert? Do you encounter it much, or do you think writers tend to not get it on the page, because it is hard?
I do love situation comedy, that's for sure. And I've been a long time fan of sci-fi sitcoms. So back to the day when Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was first staged as a radio play. We used to tune into Radio 4 once a week to listen to it. That was when I was a student. And that, I think, set the scene for me of that sort of dry British humour. Before that, even when I was younger, we used to gather around the Sunday lunch table, and Dad would put on some of the old... what are we talking about now? We're talking about all those guys that used to be in all the old British comedians. I'm trying to think now. The names will come to me. But some of them are absolute classics. The Navy Lark I used to listen to a lot. So there might be some listeners who are familiar with these. But again, sitcoms. The Navy Lark was staged on a ship, and they had a bumbling captain who was always driving into things. So it was very much staged as a part of character. And I think that has made me very appreciative of more recent times. One of the things that this is a personal story that took me into writing was a belief that I couldn't write like that. I can remember watching some Red Dwarf episodes, and I love Red Dwarf. It's the early ones anyway. It's brilliant. And I can remember finishing a couple of episodes and then reading the books as well, which were retro-written for the series. And they're not particularly brilliant, but the concepts are great and the humour's good. And thinking, I wish I could write that. I wish I'd written that. And that was in me where I didn't believe that I could write. And that's not, that's probably only 10 years ago. So it's fairly recent that I was having those frustrations.
So have you been able to write in the sitcom vein? Have you gotten some of that into your own work?
No, I would say the situation hasn't produced the comedy. I would say it's more the one-liners, like Catherine said. And if I come down to, I've trained people in being funny on stage as a part of their delivery as a speaker. So I've trained people in how to deliver to maximise your audience reaction, because I think there's something very peculiar about laughing that is, well, number one, it's involuntary. And number two, it's unexpected. And number three, it always twists your mind in a particular way, which is why it's unexpected. So it has to have those three elements. And if you can, say, make an audience laugh, and this is the same whether they're reading just one reader or whether it's an audience live, you've created a degree of rapport that's impossible any other way, because they're now laughing with you. Now, whether they're laughing with you 10 years in the future after you've written the book, or whether they're laughing with you in the room, you've created a bond.
Yeah.
And so I think humour has extraordinary power in that respect.
Right.
Obviously, has to be used selectively in writing, because let's say you're writing a horror or a crime thriller or something like that, where there are some very dark elements. Injecting too much humour in the wrong parts spoils the genre, or spoils the reader expectations.
Right.
But in the right moments, I know you could look at the Dresden Files, for example. The humour is what that sardonic sort of style is what he's known for.
Yeah.
And then you've got Jack Reacher, who goes around beating people up, but there's some comedic one-liners in there as well, for sure, which I quite enjoy. So I think, from Catherine's point of view, I think the idea that most authors are probably capable, whether they realise it or not, of delivering a one-liner in there.
Right.
That one-liner is something that can pop your reader. It's a you know how I love this thing about I didn't see that coming. The whole idea that you can weave into your story something that is foreshadowed, is part of the theme, part of the plot, and catches the reader by surprise as a scene or as a turning point in the character's journey. Well, to me, a one-liner is a beat version of that. It's delivery of something unexpected.
Right.
And whether you laugh out loud or whether you smile or smirk or twitch, it's just okay.
Right.
So that's my overview of it. I do think that obviously it's got to be character specific. Like if you think about Lord of the Rings, Frodo's not particularly funny, but Merry and Pippin are. So it's some of it's very character dependent, I think.
Yes.
Some of it is. However,
I would say that Merry and Pippin are very obviously the comedic relief, right?
Yes.
But when Frodo pops off with something that's just so out of character that it's funny, when he will slyly say something that's sort of sarcastic, that is almost, it hits more than necessarily Merry.
Because you expect it from Merry and Pippin, true.
Yeah, exactly. And when Frodo has the ability to say something sarcastic or ironic or joking in the middle of all of his pain, it changes the humor a little bit, but it makes it hit the reader with a little bit different of a more profound way of hitting the reader's emotion than necessarily Merry and Pippin being goofballs do.
Well, that's true. You've got different types of humor. You've got slapstick style humor, which is probably where Merry and Pippin fit more into in that old classic style of banter. But you've also got, pathos humor, which Frodo probably drives more. And then you've got the snarky one-liner humor, which is just that character-driven, like a Dresden, I guess, character.
Yeah, sometimes humor is also situational. I mean, I think you've got, from what you guys were saying, observational, where the character makes an observation about something, and then slapstick, like the jokesters, and then also sometimes the situation itself is where the humor lies. And I find humor delivers much better out loud than off of the page, so you were talking about radio shows before, and when those lines are performed, that adds so much body to the lines. It gives them delivery, and then also that character isn't just in the reader's imagination, it's actually coming to life. And I know in some of my own short stories, they don't read funny to me until I read them out loud. And then I find they crack me up, and surprisingly so sometimes. Because when I'm writing, I'm in this crafting headspace, and I'm thinking ahead to the next line, and I'm, doing all this work stuff. And when I leave that space and just read it, then it's like the lines are being delivered in order as they're meant to be to the reader, without all the forethought and back thought and crafting stuff.
Yes.
And that's when I discover humor that I didn't even necessarily know I was writing at the time.
That's a really good point, actually. I think that some humor can come in easily in the revision phases. So, I think you can easily think a lot of us can think in our first draft are, variously alternating from this is the most brilliant thing that anyone's ever written to this is the biggest pile of crap ever. And so sometimes and you might lose the humor element in there, or think you've written something funny and then you come back to read it, that's not funny at all.
Right.
Because it was an in the moment thing. But it's not to say, I think we tend to think that because of watching people like Jerry Seinfeld just stand up and sort of casually deliver these, off-the-cuff remarks that have people falling about in their seats, that somehow humour is an innate skill that just drips off people because they're just funny people, funny guys or funny women. But that's a learned skill, and writing is a learned skill. Writing humour is a learned skill. And you just made a really good point there that when it's delivered live, we have all those other subtle clues. We've got timing. That's that old thing. What's the best thing about jokes? Timing. And then you've got the voice. You can tell when someone's being snarky or sarcastic or sardonic or about to deliver a joke, or they've got that sort of cheeky look on their face, and that's hard to. You can write it. But then you might lose the spontaneity if you're writing it,
Right.
So we're left with those words of dialogue. And then I know for me, what I'm doing is I've got the character I'm wearing the character. As you all are when you're writing the dialogue, and you go, oh, that's hilarious. And then you come back and just read it as a reader without wearing the character on your head. And you go, it's not that funny, really. Why? And so sometimes you might have to put a little clue to that prior, so that alert the reader why this is going to be funny, but unconsciously.
Yeah, and I think that raises a really great point for writers to keep in mind is that your character in your head delivering that dialogue needs to match the character you put on the page that the reader experiences. So if you haven't built this personality throughout this character's presence on the page, when those lines are delivered, they're going to probably fall flat, because the reader won't experience your performance of the character unless you've built that into every moment on the page with that character, that personality.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So in some ways, I think that's why most of us steer clear of it, because you're trying to write something that's unexpected because it's a comedic moment, and yet it has to fit within what the reader expects of your character. So, your character's a dour attorney, and then all of a sudden they find that they've gone to a stand-up comedy and delivering jokes. What?
Yeah, they better fall flat on their face if it hasn't been built up exactly. that this is an ability that character has. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so I think it's there. I mean, there are some good books about it as well. Comedy Writing Step by Step is one that I own. It's a hard one to. A lot of. Well, maybe I'll backtrack again. I do think I learned a lot by experiencing as a consumer, like I said, all the way back to Hitchhiker's Guide, and prior to that, the radio shows that Mum and Dad used to listen to, and the whole, I'm sorry I haven't a clue. Improv, I think improv is a brilliant way of developing your writing skills if you want to inject comedy, because the whole idea of accepting the offer, I think, is brilliant for writers, whether you're writing comedy or not. It's frustrating to read something where characters just, butt each other and stop the interplay. Improv is all about interplay.
Yes, I think that's a really great point, Robert, that I want to shine a spotlight on what you just said about having your characters say yes to each other so that you don't, squash your own story's evolution or advancement on that page, and getting into some of that situational comedy and some of those great lines, they're going to come out of that playfulness, right? So if your characters say no to each other, or they're being overly rational or overly sensible, your story is going to miss that tack that takes us into fun or whimsy or humor.
Yeah, that's right. You can't block, and and it's frustrating because people say, "Well, how can I have characters have an argument?" Well, go and watch things where they do that really, really well, like long-running sitcoms like Friends or Big Bang Theory, where you've got extraordinarily different characters who rub up against each other. They do not block; they parry.
Right.
And it is wonderful. I mean, obviously you've got a writer's room, so you might have 8 writers on that, and that's a little different.
And they're playing with each other the way the characters do.
Yeah. So, and we can still do the same. We can have beta readers, we can have editors, we can have friends that we run things past, or without telling anybody, you can be playing with those sort of things in real life.
Right.
Or watching how people spar with one another, yet don't block. And by blocking, what we're meaning is, if someone says, you're coming to the restaurant tonight, right? And the other character says, no.
Right.
Okay, I've got nowhere to go with that, really. And well, obviously you could make something of it. But if they come back with saying, you've chosen that Japanese place again, haven't you? And implying that there's some reason that they're, getting at them. And so that's still contrasting, but it's not, they're not going against them. And now the other character has to take that and run with it, saying, well, Japanese said you wanted to experience different cultures. So they're throwing things at one another and
right.
And that.
Yeah, and what you just said about the coming back with the line, you've chosen the Japanese restaurant again, haven't you? That then adds a layer of subtext to your story because something is implied and the reader doesn't yet know quite what to infer from that, except clearly there's some kind of criticism happening. So then we're anticipating, okay, what's next? What is wrong with the Japanese restaurant? So that's another great thing to do as a writer, is to put that subtext in there, which will lead us to the unexpected, whether it's humor or some other, a complication of some kind.
Yes. Actually, I think I haven't read it yet. I've got it. I think Keith Johnston's wrote a book about improv for writers. Because his book called Impro is probably the seminal work. And it's fascinating. It's a life-changing book, actually.
Really?
You read it and realise where we inadvertently or unconsciously block people in our lives. And by accepting the offer and by understanding, like he described some of the exercises that he'll put his acting students through, and he said, "Oh, I will guarantee you, it'll always go through these 2 stages before we get any value. It'll always go." Death and sex, and you've got to get past those before, particularly with mask work where people have to wear a mask, and so it's all about what they say or how their bodies move because there's no facial expression, and they start to adopt and they get 15 seconds or 30 seconds to look at themselves with the mask in a mirror, and after that they don't know what they look like except how the other characters are reacting to them in the improv. So I highly recommend it. It's an education, even if you're not in. I mean, as authors we are directors and direct characters. So I think all of those things could be of interest to authors. And coming back to what we were talking about with humor, I think some of those best one-liners do come from improv. So, go and watch Whose Line Is It Anyway, for example, and you'll get comedic inspiration there too.
Yeah, that was definitely a funny show. That was one I really enjoyed. Any books that have made you laugh out loud?
Well, some of the Red Dwarf.
Is that in book form? Or just TV?
Yeah, they do. No, in book form. There are 3 or 4 books. They're not all. There's a couple that aren't great, but there's a couple that are really good. Douglas Adams, if you like that style of humour. So again, Hitchhiker's Guide. But he also, what did you write? The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul. The Dirk Gently series. Yeah, some good ones in there. I'd have to think about it.
Yeah. I have one, Road Fever by Tim Cahill. That one is memoir. He's a journalist who went with a driver and drove from the southernmost tip of South America up through to the, northernmost point on the continent. And he actually only tells the story up to the American border. I think America and Canada weren't humorous enough. But a lot of situational humor in that, dealing with different cultures and border crossings and bureaucracies and all kinds of things. And I read it sitting on my lunch breaks outside many years ago, and passersby would stare because I would just be cracking up. I couldn't not laugh out loud at this book. So
excellent.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yes.
and I suppose again, comedy is one of those weird things because it's very personal, isn't it? It's you can't always make everyone laugh all the time, and it's a very personal. Whether some people absolutely love. I mean, for example, we're not fans of Chevy Chase style humor,
right?
So and Will Ferrell. If it's got Will Ferrell in it, I won't watch it. Because it just drives me nuts.
Yeah.
This is some of the biggest selling comedy out there. Jim Carrey, I don't like all of Jim Carrey's stuff particularly. Right. So I veer away from that sort of over-exaggerated slapstick style.
Yeah, which I don't think would work well on the page because you would have to describe in minutiae all of the physicality that happens visually like that on the screen.
True.
Humor writing, I think, is very different than humorous acting or joke telling.
Good point. Yeah, visual gags.
I can't really. Hard to write those. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Do you have any final thoughts about?
Well, I sincerely hope listeners found this absolutely uproariously funny.
Yeah. Good luck. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com. We're recording. Okay, total Easter egg there.